First thing that kind of set alarm bells ringing for me was the videos that came out of China, people just collapsing in the street. Have you ever seen anybody since then in the street just gone, No person who took that vaccine has any idea of the effects that it can have on your body over the next decade. Military-grade psychological operations were carried out on the people of this country. I'm angry about that.
Parents giving their food to their child on a tennis racket.
It was a complete and utter lie. They were always coming for the children.
I'm delighted to have with me today the legend himself, Matthew Le Tissier. A real pleasure to have you.
Ash. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. The first question I'd like to ask you is going back to your love of football. Where did it come from, and how did you know you were that good?
My family were a really sporty family. So my dad was a pretty good footballer. I've got 3 older brothers who were all very, very good footballers. Probably 2 of them equally as talented as I was, I would say. Our kind of whole lives in Guernsey growing up revolved around sport, whether that be football, cricket, tennis, table tennis, softball we played as well. Our whole lives were just revolved around a ball, really.
I see. When did you sort of get recognised or scouted, as they say?
So I was quite late being picked up by a professional team because I was nearly 15, I think, or may even have been just 15 when Southampton first spotted me. But I kind of knew from about the age of 7 or 8 that I was pretty good at this sport. I was scoring a lot of goals. Most of the teams that I played in were winning the league. So I kind of knew I was pretty good. I didn't know just how good in comparison to people over here on the mainland, because Guernsey's pretty small. So there wasn't a massive talent pool to choose from when it came to football. So when Southampton spotted me, I came across when I was 15, and it went really well. The first week that I trained with them, after that week they decided that they wanted to sign me as an associate schoolboy, so I must have made a pretty good impression. And I came across during the holidays to train with the other schoolboys, and then when I finished my GCSEs, the decision was made as to which of these lads is going to be given a youth training scheme, as it was back then. It wasn't an apprenticeship. I was one of the 9 lucky ones that got chosen to come across and have a crack at being a professional footballer full time.
When you came along here, were you nervous? Were you that I'll make it through? You saw the competition, not just the 9 lads, then you had all the other.
Yeah, there was certainly a bit of uncertainty there. I knew that there was only a small percentage of players that were apprentices in football who actually went on to have a real long career in the top flight. So I was pretty realistic about that, but I always had a lot of faith in my ability. And it didn't take long. In the Southampton youth team, we started off and we were winning a lot of games. I was scoring a lot of goals. We won the league. I think I scored 59 goals in the season that season. So that was pretty cool. And then the following season was when I made my debut very early on into the next season. So I wasn't even 18 when I made my debut in the First Division. So it was quite a transformation, going from being a school kid taking his exams in May 1985 to then being in August 1986, and I'm playing in the First Division against all these fully grown men who were pretty good at football.
And scoring 59 goals, that sounds like you were not a striker, you ended up being a sort of midfielder.
Well, I played a right wing a lot of the time, but in those youth team days, I think I also played a little bit as a centre forward alongside Francis Benali, actually, who kind of went on to be, still is one of my best mates, and our careers kind of went different ways in terms of our position, because Franny kept dropping back and ended up playing as a left back for most of his career. And I stayed, up around the top end of the pitch, scoring goals and creating goals.
And your family, obviously, and other teachers, and they were quite supportive, because sometimes you get a lot of stories of people saying, you can't be an astronaut or something like that.
Oh yeah. No, my sports teacher, Mr. Henry at the Mardic Trade School, was brilliant for me. Really supportive. I think he'd also taught my older brothers, so he knew that the family was pretty talented sport wise. And he was really supportive. My parents were really supportive. My older brothers were the same. They let me join in with them, even though they were like 4, 6, and 7 years older than me. They let me join in the football with them when I was playing, and they were playing with their mates. And I think that was one of the things that actually helped me get good quicker at football, because when you're playing against people that are a lot bigger and a lot stronger than you, you've got to work out ways to try and win, and I think that really helped me growing up.
Did you sort of already visualise it, that I'm playing for a club or I'm going to...
Yeah, I actually, funny you should mention that, I actually wrote a story when I was at 11, and it was for the Eisteddfod, and I wrote this story, and it was all about me playing in the World Cup final and scoring, or just about to score, the winning penalty before my mum woke me up just as I was about to take the penalty. So I wrote this whole story about being a professional footballer, wanting to play for my country, and it was strange because at that time, penalties weren't really a big deal in my life, and yet, as it happened in my career, they went on to be kind of a big part of my reputation, because I only missed 1 out of the 48 that I took. So and that was me at 11 writing about it.
Wow, yeah. So it does go to show that Ricky Lambert's idea of manifestation has a lot of power. I think
it does. Yeah,
attraction there.
Yeah, definitely.
That is amazing. Who were your early role models? Who was your favourite sort of players growing up?
There was one. Well, there was 2 players really. Because I was a Spurs fan, Glenn Hoddle was my ultimate hero. In fact, I was probably a Spurs fan because of Glenn Hoddle. I loved the way that he played football. So I guess kind of whoever Glenn had played for would have been the team that I supported probably. So he was somebody who I watched, and he just made the game look so easy. It was just so effortless and graceful in the way that he played football. So he was the first one that really kind of caught my eye and developed my love of football through him. And even though I was a Spurs fan, the other person that I really admired was Liam Brady, who was playing for Arsenal at the time. But Liam was kind of just had the most wonderful left foot, and again a really graceful footballer, really skillful. And so they were the 2 guys really that stood out for me, and it was probably because of Liam really, which is why I kind of worked so hard on my left foot, because I wanted to be a bit like Liam Brady as well, and so I worked pretty hard on getting my left foot kind of somewhere up near as good as my right.
That's amazing, yes, because you did score with both feet. I know.
I was pretty comfortable with both feet in the end, but I mean that didn't come naturally. I had to work at the left foot. The right foot came very naturally, but I had to work a lot on the left foot, and that's something that I'd probably say to young kids who have got ideas of being a professional footballer. If you've got a weak foot, just work on it a lot and try and get it as good as you can. It might never ever be the same as your other foot, but if you can get it 90% there, you give yourself a heck of an advantage on a football pitch.
Who were the people that were guiding you in the early days? Were there any players, not necessarily like who gave you praise in the early days, or who supported you? Who was your first manager actually? How did they look after and motivate you?
Yeah, it was interesting actually, because when I started at Southampton in July '85, they actually didn't have a manager. So Laurie McMenemy had left. He'd gone to manage Sunderland, and Southampton hadn't actually appointed a successor to him yet. So when I started, we had no manager, and then about a week or so afterwards, they appointed Chris Nicol. And obviously, I'd known of Chris, being a football fan, watching. I'd known that he'd played for the club previously, but I didn't know him as a man, and he was an interesting character actually. He was pretty fearsome, pretty old school type manager, a real teacup thrower, and a man who lost his temper quite a bit if you got defeated. But he was also, I think, really good for me in my career, because he kind of he taught me how to toughen up a little bit. So he would actually, in training, because he was only kind of just retired a couple of years, he was still in good shape, and he would train with us. And so I noticed that when we had 5-a-side matches, he would put himself on the opposite side to me, and he would mark me, and he would kick me, and he would, and he really kind of just wanted me to know this is what's going to happen when you're going to be playing against the big boys. And yeah, I learned a lot from Chris. Actually, he was a really good manager for me.
You mentioned Vialli, just we were talking earlier, and Xavi and others that came and gave you some advice, even though they might not have been on your team. But
yeah, not so many that are in the opposition, to be honest. But we had a lot of good experienced players around that time at Southampton. So I cleaned the boots of the likes of David Armstrong, Joe Jordan. The older people may remember these names. But there was probably a whole host of players. Nick Holmes was another one who was really good. He went on to become, after he retired, the reserve team manager. So I played a few games under Nick there. And these guys were all pretty good at passing on what they'd learned down the years as well. So that was pretty nice.
On the health side, what sort of things were you eating? And was it because we hear? I think when Arsene Wenger came in, they say he revolutionised the fitness side of things.
Yes, he did. I mean, but it was probably a little bit too late for me by that point. I probably had one of the worst diets of any professional athlete you're ever likely to imagine. My food intake was pretty bad from a professional sports person's point of view. I was definitely one of those people that relied on my natural ability as opposed to relying on being fitter than everybody else on the team. That wasn't my favourite part of the game. I didn't really like pre-season very much. I just wanted the ball to come out and show everyone how good I was when I had the ball at my feet. I kind of didn't really take the whole nutrition side very seriously in my career.
And what about the training, though? You probably could have made it up in the training, because I guess the managers and coaches would have put you into your paces, I suppose.
Definitely. The training was pretty intense. In those early days, there was not a lot of sports science around. So a lot of our pre-season, we were just pushed to the limits physically. You had players being physically sick because of the way that they pushed us just to get us as fit as they possibly could. And although I probably wasn't the fittest player in my team, if you were to compare me to a regular member of the public, I was in pretty good shape, really, especially in those younger years. I was pretty skinny. If you look back at the early years of my career, I was a pretty skinny right winger who still had a bit of pace in those days. And then I kind of bulked out a little bit and got stronger. Wasn't pushed off the ball so easily, but wasn't quite as quick.
Mm-hmm. And who were the best players you got to play against that really stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, there were players like Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp was amazing. Gianfranco Zola was another favourite of mine. I got to play against Juventus in the early 90s and played against Roberto Baggio, who was an amazing footballer, but I would say technically probably the best player that I played against. Gianluca Vialli was in that team as well. So there were some wonderful footballers, but I think probably the best one in terms of the best Englishman of my generation was Paul Gascoigne. Gazza was just incredible. The Paul Gascoigne of 1990 at the Italia 90 was just an awesome footballer. It was a real shame he had that injury not long after that World Cup, and we never quite saw him reach those heights of Italia 90, but still an awesome footballer.
It seemed like a great personality to be around.
He was an absolute fruitcake. He just never had a second's respite from Gazza when he was around. He was just so hyperactive but a real character with a massive heart. He would do anything for anyone if he could. It's just a shame to see the struggles that he had with the drink and everything, and it's just a little bit sad, really. I don't think we ever really got to see just how good Gazza could have been. In the peak of his career, when you get to kind of 27, 28, you kind of should be at your peak. He kind of didn't quite get there because of the knee injury, and he never quite reclaimed that form of Italia 90.
I feel some small sympathy personally for you, because we always waited to hear that you're surely going to be the first person on the team sheet and the England team will be built around you. That's what we thought.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Glenn Hoddle was the manager at that time, because I got the sense it was just was crying shame that you were not picked, and it was very upsetting as a fan.
Yeah, I mean it was frustrating. I only got 8 England caps. You're right. Glenn gave me 3 of those, I think. And
why do you think that was? I mean, you were clearly, everyone would say, you're probably our best player, or up there with the best.
I mean, probably Gaza was probably one of the reasons why. I was competing with him for like the creative force in the team. So that was pretty difficult. But also, I think it went against me that I stayed at Southampton. I didn't really move to one of the big clubs because there was definitely an advantage, certainly back in the 90s, to playing at a big club. You were definitely looked upon more favourably by England managers if you were playing for one of the big boys.
And no politics involved or anything, do you think? Or were you quite outspoken then, or thinking critically?
I don't think there was politics involved then. There was a couple of incidents which might have had something to do with it. I nearly joined Spurs in 1990 and I changed my mind at the last second. And their manager at the time wanted to have a chat with me to see if he could convince me to change my mind again. And I decided I didn't want to speak to him. I'd made my mind up. And then the same thing happened with Chelsea in 1995. Now, the Spurs manager in 1990 was Terry Venables, and the Chelsea manager in 1995 was Glenn Hoddle. So I'd kind of blanked both of them from talking to them, and they both then went on to become the next England manager. And although they both picked me, they didn't pick me for very long.
But you played through your injuries, you said, and that's something that we wouldn't do now. And yet you were given that license. They said, if you...
Yeah, it was a very different time back in the 80s and 90s when it came to injuries and stuff. I don't think we had, quite the information around back then. We didn't have the sports scientists around. So a lot of the time, the decision was left to the player as to whether he was fit or not. And certain players had certain mindsets. Some would need to be 100% fit before they declared themselves ready to play. I wasn't like that. I was happy to play, if I was 70% fit, 65% fit. If I felt like I could have an influence on the game still, then I would declare myself fit. And as I said when we spoke earlier, I retired at 33, and I believe one of the reasons why I had to do that, I kind of accumulated injuries at the back end of my career, but I think that was a reaction to having played so many games in the middle part of my career where I probably, looking back, was probably not the wisest decision in terms of extending my career. But I have to say, if you ask me if I would do the same again, I'd probably say yes, because in those situations that we were in at the time, we were fighting relegation. I felt like the team needed me, and I wanted to try and help my football club. So as it turned out, we never got relegated, despite the fact sometimes we were pretty close. And so looking back, I'd probably make those same decisions again if it helped my football club.
It's great to hear. And your mental strength, I mean, you must have had some great mental strength. I mean, to stand in front of the opposition sometimes and score those penalties fearlessly. And I mean, how do you get that singular focus? Because we talk to kids and they get quite nervous.
Yeah.
Even putting them on a spot in a classroom where would you like to show me what you can do with this electric circuit? They sometimes know the answer, but they still don't want to put themselves in that position. And there you are, ready to score. Literally hit the ball into the direction of the fans in the net. Yeah.
It's an interesting one. I've never really kind of studied it in any great depth, but I'm not quite sure where it came from. But I've always been pretty headstrong. I've always had a real big belief in my own ability for a start, so I think that kind of helps. I've always quite enjoyed, being in that pressure situation. So I always looked forward to it as opposed to, dreading it. And when I watch penalty shootouts, actually in football matches now, I find it fascinating because I watch the players' facial expressions when he's coming up to take the penalty, and you can almost see in their eyes the ones that want to be there and the ones that are absolutely scared shitless to be there. And so there's a lot of times where penalties are missed, and it doesn't really surprise me because you can almost see on their face that they're not confident. And one of the things you have to do if you want to be a penalty taker is you have to have the ability to block out all the negativity. That's one of the biggest things, and unfortunately I had that pretty strong mental attitude towards things, and pretty positive mental attitude, and I think that's where it comes from. I also had, obviously, when it came to penalties, I had a good technique. I could strike the ball pretty firmly with my side foot, which meant I could keep the accuracy on the ball, but the mental side of things is one that doesn't get spoken about too much, and it's pretty important.
Were there players that would try and put you off, and what sort of things would they say? Because we never pick up all of this stuff really.
No, yeah, the goalkeepers never really tried putting me off. I mean, maybe there was a few that would try to delay the kick a little bit and try and put a bit more pressure on, but Dennis Wise actually was probably the funniest one. He used to come, whenever I was playing against him and we got a penalty, he'd come and bet me money that I would miss it. And of course Dennis was the penalty taker for the opposition as well, so there were times when I'd do the same thing to him just to try and put him off, but he didn't really miss many. So we ended up giving each other some money after the game.
Nice. That's good, that there was such a good banter as well.
Yeah, it's nice.
And you said that there were some great compliments paid for you, but I mean, Vialli, I'd love to hear the great story of the great giving you a shirt, coming especially to you.
Yeah, we played Juventus in the early 90s, and I was still pretty young then. I was maybe 20, 22, something like that. And Vialli was this worldwide star at that point. He was a little bit older than me, and we were warming up for this game, and he came across from the Juventus side of the pitch and came down to our side of the pitch and made a beeline for me and asked me if we could swap shirts after the game. And I was like, wow, this is Gianluca Vialli asking me if he could have my shirt. So yeah, that was a pretty cool moment. And Xavi in 2010 at the World Cup gave an interview where he spoke about his childhood heroes, and he mentioned me as one of those. So I mean, I was like, wow, I was pretty gobsmacked when somebody of that caliber is going, I watched Matt and Tissier play and I was inspired, and I was like, wow, that just makes everything worthwhile.
Yes, you certainly were inspirational, there's no doubt. You got me out into playing football, something I never did.
Oh, wow, thanks, mate.
Yeah. Some of the goals, they're the most spectacular and audacious goals. It's the best collection I think I've seen in at that time, perhaps even still.
I like doing things differently. I like to try different things. I had a good imagination. I think that's kind of the key to really good footballers. I think is a good imagination. So you got to be able to think of new things to do and new ways to get past an opponent, and how can I manipulate the ball in this way, what spin can I put on the ball. There's all sorts of things that kind of go into it, and I loved experimenting with that kind of stuff.
So retirement's coming up. It must have been on your mind, like, what am I going to do next? What sort of things were you thinking of? Were you already planning the sort of punditry or coaching, or what, were you a bit worried? Because I mean, I always read, and it stays in my mind, the tragic stories of people like Kenny Sansom, who great player, great 83 something caps for England, and the terrible downhill spiral that we don't always recognise. This Paul Merson as well, another legend, great man.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I didn't really have any great plan. I didn't. I just kind of wanted to play golf, really, if I'm honest. I just wanted to just stop training, and I had 17 years of this incessant physical battering of my body, and so at the end of that, I just thought, right, I just want to rest and I want to play golf and just enjoy my life. And sadly, I didn't earn enough money that meant I could not have to work. So I then kind of fell into the punditry side of things. Really, I had no great plan to do it, but I was asked by Sky, and I was doing a bit of work for BBC and ITV on the football focus shows and all that kind of stuff. And I was pretty comfortable with it. I was happy to talk. I think when you know your subject pretty well, it's pretty easy to talk about it. You can be comfortable in that, and that's a thing. That's a nice bit of advice for people as well. I think throughout life, just if you're going to have to stand up and talk about something, know your subject well, and you as a teacher will know that. If you know your subject well, you're confident that you can then talk about it with a confidence, and people will believe in you because you're speaking from the heart, and you feel like you know your subject well. So I didn't really have any plans, but I fell into the punditry side of things. I enjoyed it. It didn't take up huge amounts of time, which was nice. So I had a kind of job that was maybe a couple of days a week, which meant that I could also play golf as well, which fitted in perfectly.
And it's interesting because you said sort of speak your heart, know your subject, but I think you really have spoken your heart, because you said, for example, it was a very sad day as well, but obviously looking back in hindsight, it's not such a sad day, because you spoke your mind, and now there's so many different stories. I don't like to follow the stories from the mainstream, but just from your own view, I mean, unfortunately you did lose the work at the Sky Sports for really speaking your heart and speaking your truth, and it resonated with many of us, and we agreed with you. But what was it? Because some people say it was the Black Lives Matter, but then others say it was something to do with the fact that they were testing. There was a sort of testing regime. People were getting COVID, and it was sort of, some of the lower clubs didn't perhaps want to get relegated, so they wanted to try and postpone the game, get many people off with COVID.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably a combination of several things, really. I'm not sure it was just one in particular. So I think, yes, I refused to wear the Black Lives Matter badge. I think that didn't go down particularly well, kind of going against the narrative.
Why did you say you're not going to wear it? I mean, I know
because
about Black Lives Matter
as well, because
I
coincidentally, just a couple of weeks before, I'd kind of been looking into the organisation itself. As you remember, back then we were having a lot of spare time. We weren't allowed to work, and so I was just kind of having a look around, see what was going on, doing a little bit of research into things, and I came across their whole ethos, and I was looking at it thinking, I don't like this. I didn't agree with that at all. Some of the stuff, the defunding of the police, they wanted to destroy the nuclear family unit, all that kind of stuff, and I was like, that's not for me. And so I was pretty clear to them that after that first time we were made to wear the badge, I said, I'm not wearing this again. I can't. I felt very uncomfortable, and I won't be wearing it. I said, if you want me to wear a different badge, the kick racism out badge, all that kind of stuff, I'm more than happy to do that. I just felt like I needed to make a stand. So I did, and I don't think that went down very well. I then spoke out about the COVID testing that was going on in the Premier League, where the clubs that were in the relegation zone or near the relegation zone were the ones that were kind of almost actively trying to get the season voided, so that they didn't get relegated and they could start the next season in the Premier League again with the big money that is available for that. I just made some observations which they weren't very happy with. Well, I say they weren't very happy with. There was a chief executive of one of the football clubs that made a complaint to Sky about me insinuating that this was going on, whereas actually factually there was nothing wrong with my tweets. That it was absolutely 100% true, and the fact that somebody complained about it tells me that he's probably got a guilty conscience then, hasn't he? Because otherwise there'd be no point complaining, because factually it was absolutely spot on. So yeah, and then I think you add into that the fact that the whole diversity thing on television was coming in. We were a program for 6 hours on a Saturday afternoon, and we had five middle-aged white blokes in there, and that's not the way that the company wanted to go. They wanted to be more diverse and more representative of our society on the television. And again, I don't have a problem with that at all. I think the television should absolutely be representative of our country, 100%, and I think proportional representation on the television should be absolutely right, and I don't have a problem with that at all. But I think that you can also go too far the other way, and then start discriminating against white people, which I think is kind of the pendulum has swung. For me, pendulum has swung just a little bit too far. I think there's a happy ground in the middle where we should all be, where yes, we have proportional representation, but also we have to remember, really the most important thing is it should be the best person for the job, really, irrespective of creed, colour or whatever.
No doubt about it, yeah. That's a very basic sort of important observation now.
It's pretty common sense to me, but
absolutely,
apparently not to the rest of the world.
Yes, we should see beyond the smallest skin. I mean, if you peel the layer, who would know who's
exactly.
what?
Exactly.
It's not what it's about.
We're all as one. We're all humans together.
Exactly. Yeah,
and
family.
Come on.
Yeah. Now we come to perhaps this whole COVID business, because I think this is where I think, I have to really commend you, because it's easy for people on the, just on the side to say things, but you've got a huge platform. You're a very important person, played for England, represented the whole country. So many people look up to you, and you were so brave to put it all on the line and speak out, give so much hope and courage to others as well. How did that come about? How did you see through it? Because I think you saw through it very early on.
Yeah, very early. I mean, the first thing that kind of set alarm bells ringing for me was the videos that came out of China, with the people just collapsing in the street. Didn't look very genuine to me. These people were falling over. Now, have you ever seen anybody since then do that in this country? Has anybody ever in the street just gone, ooh? And it all just, I was like, well, that's a bit odd. That doesn't look, and it's coming out of China. So again, do we really believe? All of a sudden, we started to believe everything that was coming out of China, when for years and years we've been told, yeah, it's all propaganda that comes out of that country. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, blimey, look what's happening in China. We better lock down the entire world. And I was like, that's not right. And then I started kind of looking into things, and I kind of went and had a look around the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation website to see where they were donating their money to. I went and had a look around the World Economic Forum website. Certainly didn't like what I saw there. It was all pretty scary stuff, the world that they were trying to point us towards, and I felt like I had to try to make people aware that what was coming actually isn't what they're telling you it is. I think it was a massive overreaction. I think we knew very early on that the only people that were being affected by this were the incredibly old people, or people with compromised immune systems, and so the whole focus protection thing made a lot more sense to me. The Great Barrington Declaration, the recommendations that they made, that made a lot more sense than destroying everybody else's life. And let's be honest, that's what it's done. 3 years down the line, we're seeing the consequences of what those lockdowns do. The inflation, the mental health crisis that we've got. It's just stuff that being warned about. This isn't hindsight. There were people warning about this stuff 3 years ago, and they were silenced, they were ignored, they were cancelled. And so when people kind of go now, oh well, it's all right in hindsight, we go, well, actually, it's not hindsight, because we were saying that 3 years ago. You just didn't hear us saying it because the social media companies and the mainstream media wouldn't let any dissenting voices be heard, and there were plenty of them, but they silenced them.
Yeah, that's true. Then, of course, we moved into this whole territory where, and you made this great point, where 1 minute they're saying, Matt Hancock's on there saying, this vaccine is, the vaccine suddenly were all on the tables, but they said it would just be 15 million jabs to freedom, as if they could just, give us freedom whenever they liked. But then they said it would just be only for adults, no children.
He stood up in Parliament and said this is a adult-only vaccine and this wouldn't be given to children. And it was a complete and utter lie. They were always coming for the children. And they did it little bit by little bit. And it's, it's the boiling the ethical frog bit. If you put a frog into boiling water, he's going to jump out straight away. If you put him into cold water and just turn the temperature up, he's not going to notice. And that's exactly what's been happening to us. Little by little, they take away all your freedoms. Little by little, they raise your taxes. And eventually, you'll get to a point where you're going to have no life. You're going to have no freedom. The government will own you. Central bank digital currencies will come in. Digital IDs will come in. All this stuff that, when people were speaking about it 3 years ago, everyone was going, conspiracy theorist. And now it's like, oh, CBDCs. And they're just trying to feed it in gently to try to make it normal, and all the time we are inviting our own slavery into this world, and I'm not prepared to do that. I'm whatever it takes, I will always speak out. I want my children to enjoy the same freedoms that I enjoyed as a child. I don't wish their every move to be tracked by this government, their every transaction tracked by the government. That's why it's important to keep cash alive. I think we need less smaller governments. We don't need bigger, more authoritarian governments, in my opinion.
Youngsters look up to footballers a lot, and none have spoken out, really, hardly any. You're retired from the football, but no one who's a current player. I've not really heard. I know there's rumours, many of them haven't been jabbed, they haven't got that, but none have actually spoken out. And I thought there may be some who would, just simply because, they might have a lot to lose, but I thought financially they probably wouldn't, some of the money that they're making, or maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, no.
And Novak Djokovic did.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, he was willing to put everything on the line because he said that he wanted to be in tune with his body. He knew his body well.
Yeah.
And there was no way they was going to put anything into his body that he was uncertain about at any cost, whether it was every trophy, every record.
Yeah.
I
think it's maybe different for Novak because he's not in a team sport.
Right.
So I think this is the difference. With footballers, I know for a fact, been told by a couple of current Premier League players that about 50% of their squad was vaccinated, 50% weren't, which is not what we were being told in the media. They were very keen to try and tell everybody that these footballers, 90% of them have been vaccinated. Apparently not quite the case. Another lie. Just like the one that said there's only 5 million people who never had a vaccine in this country. Well, actually, it's closer to 20 million. Again, another lie. I've been a little bit surprised that there hasn't been more, but I understand when you're in that team environment, you don't want factions and splits in the team. And if you come out and go, well, I'm not getting vaccinated because I'm against this, this and this, and you've got your other teammates who are going very pro-vaccine, it's obviously going to cause a bit of a rift in the change room, and that's not something that you want to do. However, I am a little bit disappointed that 3 years down the line there hasn't been anybody who's really come out and kind of said what they really think, because I know there's a lot that think the way that we do.
Yes. We can't put ourselves in everyone's shoes.
No.
But I thought, God, to go to a Premier League football match, the fans had to take either a COVID test, the Vax Pass was trialled in those arenas, they had to be double jabbed or tested.
Well, this is again one of the things that
sat very worryingly with me as a player. I
very.
Don't know if I could. It's hard to say because I'm not a player.
Yeah.
But I know that didn't sit with me. I could not, go to support any cinema.
And that was one of the other things that kind of there's so many red flags for me that have gone. This doesn't make sense. So the whole football thing, you had to give proof of a negative test to be able to go into the football. Now, I sat here one day. My dad came across from Guernsey, and we were playing Brentford at St Mary's, and I pretty much at this point thought, well, if they're doing all those vaccine passes, I'll never go and watch another football match in my life. And I was sat here in the afternoon, and my wife said to me, well, you only have to take a test and have a negative result. So I said, well, how do they know I've taken the test? Because you had to self-report. So I said to her, so you're telling me I can just pretend I've taken a test, go on a website and go, I've got a negative test, I can get in the football match? And she went, yeah, you can actually do that. So I was like, oh, okay then. So I didn't bother taking the test. I just reported on this website, negative test, and I could. But the mad thing was, I go to the football match, there was not a single check at the football ground. I would just walk straight in the stadium. Not a single check of, have you got... So I was like, yeah, this makes no sense. This is absolute nonsense being portrayed by the media. Nobody's really checking it. And I had so many people tell me that it was the same in countries that were actually making it so that you had to have the vaccine to get into the country. But when you go to the airport, just walk straight through the airport, nobody checked. Wow. So it's like, something's not right here. So there was too many things that told me that this isn't what it was.
I can understand.
Made out to be.
We were at the Albert Hall campaigning outside there. They shut down the whole place because many of the people who were coming in as the audience had COVID. But all the people who were meant to go there were meant to have a vaccine passport or a test. It made no sense.
No sense.
No sense. None of the unvaccinated were allowed in officially anymore. It made no sense at
Crazy.
all. It's what it stood for was wrong. It's what. How can you stand for a test that isn't testing for anything?
Exactly.
That, by principle, is just wrong, isn't it? Because it labels. They did this to children. It labels children. They then believe that they are disease carriers who might harm granny. Their parents put them somewhere else in a room, and
the psychological operations were just through the roof. I mean, this was
it worked well because
this was
parents
military grade psychological operations were carried out on the people of this country, and I'm angry about that. And I don't think enough people are angry about it. I don't think they know exactly what happened to them.
It must have been so effective because you got parents who were taking, giving their food to their little child on a tennis racket. This is. I heard this just 2 days ago.
Wow.
I was told by a child she didn't want to get the injection. She didn't want to get vaccinated because she was always afraid of needles.
Yeah.
Her mum understood that in the past, but for this one, she was really forcing her and put her in a room. Said you can't leave this room because you've tested positive for COVID.
Wow.
And because I don't want to get sick because I've got to go to work. So it was about themselves, the adults were doing this. It's like the children are the scapegoats and they're meant to protect the adults.
I know. The adults have let the children down a lot these last few years, massively.
Yeah.
And I think the worst bit about it all, I think for me, is that the loss of trust in institutions that you maybe believed in before. So now my trust has gone in the police, the way that they've policed the protests that were going on, and the different ways that they policed the protests about lockdowns to the different way they policed the protests about the Black Lives Matter movement. So lost a lot of trust in them, a lot of trust in the scientific community. No disrespect.
I agree. Yes,
but
you're right.
Some of the stuff that they've come out with has just been anti-science. Makes no sense. And so even doctors, doctors who, and I do feel sorry for them because they probably don't know any different because they go through medical school, and they're just taught how to be drug pushers basically. There's no. My wife went to see the doctor and asked him about some supplements, about taking supplements for her diet, and he actually turned around and said, I can't give you advice on that. He said, I don't know. I was like, what? You're a doctor, surely you must have some idea of what nutrients she'll be needing. And he just said, I can't, because it wasn't really pharmaceutical based, and they weren't just giving out pills. He wasn't interested in helping her. Crazy times.
And you yourself, you're not. The worst thing is that they called you an anti-vaxxer, and many others, people you've had pretty much all. I understand you've had pretty much all the jabs throughout their life. And it's only this one, really, isn't it?
It is. I actually had, when we were playing football, we were encouraged by the football club to have the flu shot every year.
Right.
And one year, I kind of mid to late 20s, I had the shot, and within a day I was feeling pretty ill, and I had a pretty rough week, and I was like, surely that I didn't enjoy that. So when it came around the next year, I was like, no, I don't think I'll take that again. So that wasn't very good last year, and I didn't feel very nice. So I didn't have it, and I've never had the flu shot since. And coincidentally, I've never had the flu since either. So I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, I as a kid, I had all the injections, and this one, just so many red flags were being raised for me, and I think people have stopped actually thinking. They've almost outsourced their thinking to the television. That's what it feels like to me. Now I'm looking at it as a rational human being who can think logically. I think, well, hang on, we've been trying for how many decades to have a vaccine for the common cold, and yet they can't do that. They've never been able to do it. Now all of a sudden, in the space of a year, 4 companies have got a vaccine for this novel coronavirus that has just come out. And I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, how can they do that in the space of, they've been trying for decades for that other one, and now how do we know, this was the big one for me, how do we know what the long-term safety data is behind this vaccine? If they've developed it in a year and rushed it out, how do they know what's going to happen 3, 5, 10 years after taking this vaccine? They have no idea. No person who took that vaccine has any idea of the effects that it can have on your body over the next decade. Not one of them. Impossible. And that for me was the big bit where I just went, no, I'm waiting. I didn't even say I'm never going to have it. What I actually said at the start was, I'm going to wait. I need to see some long-term safety data here before I stick this stuff in my body. So that was my initial thought. Now, having seen what's happened and seen the amount of people that I know who have been damaged by it, wouldn't in a million years take that vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, has it put you off? I mean, it's put a lot of people off.
Put me off a lot of other
vaccines.
My daughter will not be having the HPV vaccine. She won't be having that because that has also had a hell of a lot of bad reactions to it. So, I didn't take that decision lightly. Me and my wife did the research on that, spoke to several people in the field, experts in the vaccine industry, and we made our decision based on the information that we got to not take that risk.
And the flu shots as well, as you say.
We won't be taking the flu shots.
Not to children, I think they do.
No, especially when they started talking about changing the flu shots to mRNA as well. And that was the other thing. The whole changing the definition of what a vaccine is just before they rolled out these things. Again, massive red flag. Why would you do that? And then the fact that they never even tested these vaccines to see if you could actually pass on this alleged virus to other people. Never even tested for that. So, and yet they were going around telling everybody, you've got to take the vaccine. You don't want to kill your granny. Like, well, hang on. You didn't even test to see if I could pass it on or not. So another lie. You've been lied to so much, and yet people still will believe these government entities and these scientific institutions, and yet they've just been lied to the whole time.
Yeah, that's been the shock, and I think the media have had ample opportunity. Every day there was some sort of a conference, wasn't it? Every day they stood in front of these lecterns.
They're not so keen to talk about the excess deaths that are going on now, though, are they? All those Chris Whitty graphs and the amount of daily death toll, and now every week we're seeing huge increases in the amount of people that should be dying, compared to the 5-year average. And yet the government are just turning a blind eye to it and not even bothering. And they know, because they know what's causing it.
How's it been in private? Because I know obviously in public it's a different step, as you say, for footballers to come out and speak. But you meet a lot of footballers, a lot of ex-footballers and people involved in the game. I mean, what's the view? I mean, I think a lot of people know things are wrong and probably knew earlier on, but they're just not willing to put their neck out on the line.
I've had a lot of messages over the last couple of years of people thanking me, agreeing with me, but can't say publicly because they don't want to lose their job. What kind of environment is that to live your life in, that you are frightened to speak about a subject because you might lose your job? Now that is the stuff of what we would expect coming out of North Korea. And yet here we are in this country, people openly admitting that they can't speak their mind because they don't want to lose their job. It's disgusting.
It's almost like they are slaves, bonded slaves to the
absolutely. And they are. I mean, whether they like it or not, I to a certain extent, I get where they are. But at the end of the day, they are enabling it to happen by not speaking out. Yeah. And I would not want to put myself in that position.
Are we able to say on record that those that have spoken out, that have come public, are there others? I mean, there's Brian Roy, who you mentioned. And others
Ricky Lambert is publicly spoken out about it. There has been others. There's been a few footballers that I've connected with privately. And when I actually put together a letter to send to the PFA and to the FA to ask for an investigation because of the amount of increase in sports people that were collapsing on the field of play, I actually went through my phone book and I asked about 100 ex-professional footballers if they would sign the letter alongside me. And out of those 100, 98 of them agreed to sign that letter with me.
Wow.
There was only 2 out of the 100 that I asked that went, no, I don't want to sign that. I don't want to be involved with that. So, that's a lot of people there that know what's going on and are concerned about what was going on.
It was just fascinating watching people comply. I understood the first 2-3 weeks, let's see what's going on, but 2 months is a long time, right? And especially when they said 2 weeks to flatten the curve or whatever it was.
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
Just surprised
That's the
me.
boiling the ethical frog thing. They go, it's just for 2 weeks, it'll be okay. And then at the end of that 2 weeks, they go, well, it's just another 2 weeks. And this is how they do it. So if they would have gone at the start and gone, right, you're going to lock down for 3 months, everyone would have gone, whoa, no. And I think it would have kicked off. Because they go, oh, it's just 2 weeks, and then, we'll get back to normal. And then, oh, it's just another 2 weeks. And that's the whole boiling the ethical frog thing. That's what they do.
And now the future, I would like to just touch on that. I'm really concerned about the young people, children and young people, because they need the guidance. They're heavily influenced with the technology. I think the social media,
absolutely,
all the algorithms, the AI, it's really taking over the, working from home and gaming, and it's just, social media is really encapsulated. They're tied to their phones. Adults are as well. We all are to some degree.
I think that's one. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably the same, but it is one of the biggest problems. I think is phone addiction, and it's something that's never spoken about. But it's fascinating. You kind of go out into the public and you walk down the street and if you just put your phone away, don't take your phone out, but go and observe everybody else. And it's fascinating to see just how engrossed people are in their phones, and it can't be healthy.
No, how will they know? They're missing out on what's going on around them. They're missing out on
the human connection, and I think that's one of the things that has been part of the plan of everything that's happened is to destroy that human connection, and they're using phones to do it, and it's being very successful at this time. But I think there are a significant amount of people that are pushing back, and all the connections that we've made, we find our tribe, you find people that think the same as you, and there is a strong fight back going on. And I think that's important to know, that yes, there is some evil at play in the world, but you also have to realise that there's a lot of good people on this planet as well, and we are coming together, and we will fight this and we will win.
That's very, very positive. We're really worried for the youngsters and children, because, if they're growing up in this environment, we've got a great experience. We remember life in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Absolutely.
We can remember a lot of freedom. I went to no cameras watching us going into schools. Now there's cameras everywhere, gates, fences, flats. You could walk into any council block and there were no doors locked.
It's quite scary. It's quite scary the way that the world has gone. We grew up. We should be very grateful.
Yes.
The time that we grew up. Childhood was spent outdoors.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the big things that I think I try to impress on our daughter, that she does. Put the phone down and get outside, go and explore. And she does that around here. We're lucky we've got the countryside around us. She's got friends who they go out on their walks and they do explore the countryside, and she loves playing sport. So I've really encouraged that as well. And I think that's vitally important, for not just for your childhood but into adulthood, to keep yourself, in shape, keep yourself healthy. I probably, looking back on my life, I probably eat healthier now than I probably have ever done. Right. Because I didn't know as a kid, and I didn't have any guidance really in that respect, and so I just impress upon kids now is try and put your devices down, get outside, get in the fresh air, get your vitamin D. It's important for your health, and play sport. It's a great thing to have in your life. It teaches you so much if you're playing team sports as well. It teaches you a lot of life lessons. You learn to get along with people who perhaps you might not have ever kind of met in your life or wanted to get along with, but you find ways of doing that through team sports, and finding things that are mutually agreeable to you. I think it's a great thing to have as a kid if you can play a few different sports.
And I think you've always said critical thinking.
Critical thinking is something
tough.
I think should be taught in schools. Never was at my school, so I'm not sure where I got it from. But I've always liked to look at things logically. I've always had a pretty logical brain and try to kind of take in the information and then make my own decisions about things as opposed to being force-fed information. And I think it's important that as humans we are given as much information as possible and allowed to then make up our own minds. And that's one of the things that's really frustrated me over the last 3 years in the media, is that we've never been given both sides of the story. You know, we've just had one narrative rammed down our throats from day one. And that for me has been probably one of the worst things that's happened over the last few years. I believe as humans we should be able to be given both sides of the story. You know, everybody should be able to have their say, and then you as a human should be able to listen to that information, take it on board and allow yourself to understand what you think makes the most sense to you. And I think that's critically important.
And you really have got to also say how much I admire you, because it should be the job of the journalists to, you know, give voice to the vaccine injured, for example.
Yeah, journalists
who've been left to sort of, sad to say this word, almost rot.
They've let the public down. I think they've let the public down the last few years. The mainstream media have been complicit in what's gone on. You know, in a democracy, you know, when you have a government, the people that should be holding that government to account are the media. They're the ones that are in that place to be able to have an influence to keep the government in check, and they did none of that. They actually just were the worst people in terms of, they were the ones that were going, oh, you know, you're locking us down for 2 weeks. Why aren't you locking us down for 4 weeks? Lock us down harder. Don't let anyone see anyone. And you're like, hang on a minute, what's going on here?
They're still at
they
it
just
now.
became complicit. They're still at it now. They're a disgrace. They're dead to me. The mainstream media just have lost all credibility the last 3 years.
But it's been left to you because you've become the journalist. You set up Flipside and you've given voice to people like you know, the poor fellow who's terribly injured, was so healthy.
Adam Rowland
and others. And
was
Alex Mitchell. I don't know
Alex Mitchell I also had on there. Yeah,
and you came to Truth Be Told.
John Watt. Yeah, I spoke at the vaccine injured rally as well, because they've been let down. Those people have been let down badly. They did what their government told them to do. They were coerced into taking something that they probably didn't need to, and they've ended up horrifically injured because of it, and the government have turned their backs on them. And that for me is reprehensible, and the journalists will not give them a voice. There's been very few who have been able to actually interview them, get their story out there, but 99% of the mainstream media have been complicit in ignoring these stories, and it's disgusting.
What was the response like after you were at the rally? Did you get other people who hadn't contacted you come and sort of get awoken perhaps by your rousing speech there?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of people come up to me in public over the last probably 18 months or so and actually thank me for speaking out, and because, you know, they've either thought the same as I have for a long time, or what I'd been saying to them had resonated and they'd actually changed their mind and realised that perhaps they have been duped over the last few years. And so, yeah, it's been pretty heartwarming. You know, I think I can probably only remember one person in public who has actually criticised me. He wasn't brave enough to do it to my face. He was about 5 yards away in a crowd at Cheltenham and shouted that I was an anti-vaxxer at me. And that is like one incident in 3 years. And so, yeah, I think the vast majority of people that have come up to me have actually said thank you very much.
So in that regard, we can say that certainly this state has failed to turn the people against each other, because I don't feel that people have really turned against each other by and large.
No, I think we would be, if the state got their way, I think we would be in a lot worse position than this country is at the moment. There's still fights to be had, but I think the fight back that we've seen from the decent percentage of people who know and understand what's going on has been enough to keep them at bay for now, but the fight goes on.
I've felt a lot of spiritual connection during
Yes.
this time. That it's almost like there is some great power out there, some great energy of light, whatever you want to call it, God.
Definitely.
There is something there that's guiding us.
Yeah, I think there is definitely there is a fight going on, and the fight is good versus evil, and I have no doubt about that. And I've now found it very easy to work out which are the people on the good side, and that's and through that connection, that spirituality, I think it becomes much clearer, and so it's been wonderful to meet you, because I know you've been on the right side of history. You will be on the right side of history.
Yes.
Thanks for all your work, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
It really has. It's an honour. I never would have imagined, but I always was connected with you somehow. And I think what happened in our lives before 2020, I think all of that had a meaning.
Yes.
To build us up to where we are now. I think there was a purpose for us being here on this earth.
I think you're very right.
And I'm really touched to have met you. I can't tell you how an honour it is.
Likewise.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Ash.
been a
Great
real
to meet
pleasure.
you.
Yeah, really great to meet you.
Thank
I'm
you,
sure
mate.
we'll meet again. Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for your time.